Welcome back. In our last segment, we heard from Journal News Tax Watch columnist David McKay Wilson as he showed us how taxpayer money is being spent on lavish parties and trips. Rich recently sat down with McKay and dug deeper into the story.
This story's got a lot of people talking, so let's start with some of the basics and the terms. 2% money, as we're going to talk a lot about in this conversation, what is it?
This is a 2% tax on the premiums that the insurance companies pay on insurance policies that are written by out-of-state insurance companies. Brings in a total of $60 million a year to New York, which is then divvied up among the various fire departments, fire companies around the state.
So this should be overseen by the Controller's Office, the State Controller's Office, and Tom Donapoli, the Controller, has spent at least the last few years looking into mostly the upstate fire companies. To this point, the Westchester or the lower New York fire companies really have escaped a lot of detection. That is until some of your reporting.
Except for Yonkers.
Except for Yonkers, exactly. So let's first start there with what we learned in Yonkers, and then we'll talk about a few of the other discoveries you came across.
Well, in Yonkers, for most of the departments, it's a very broad definition of what you can use it on. Yonkers, it's very restrictive because they had a special act just for Yonkers, which said that they could only use the money to pay for indigent or disabled firefighters. Well, since the law was enacted in 1912, all the disability laws have come into place. There, in fact, are not any indigent or disabled firefighters. They're all taken care of. Meanwhile, the firefighters union in Yonkers has been spending money on the firefighters themselves, which the comptroller has alerted them to in 2015 that they couldn't do this anymore.
Now, just as a quick reminder, everybody, we're talking about your money. This is taxpayer money. So when I describe what's going on with David at some of these firehouses, just remember at the end of the day, this isn't OPM, this is tax dollars. So remember when we have budget fights in different towns, what they can afford and what they can't afford, think about where some of this money is being spent. Now let's go to White Plains Fire Company number 1 because of the poster child of your story. They have not been to a fire since 2013.
Well, not even, they haven't been called to action. They haven't been in fires forever. But this was to set up a shelter because there was a fire at the YMCA, 2013. They haven't done anything since 2013, and they get about $50,000 a year. They have $214,000 in the bank, and it's basically a social club.
Well, and some of the examples, David, I mean, it was the 165th anniversary. That's a big round number, I grant you. Talk about what they've done because it boggles the mind.
Well, the 165th anniversary they declared was a ladies' day, and they went to the Metropolitan Opera, spent $6,400 on that trip. In addition, that year, they spent about $5,000 going to a Mets game. They went to a Notre Dame football game at MetLife Stadium. They spent almost $1,800 on a Knicks game, another $1,800 on a Rangers game. And then they took an offshore fishing trip off of Long Island. That was $1,500. And that was before they had the parties.
Unbelievable. Now, I want to pivot to Patterson, where
yes.
We had theft that went on as well.
Yes, well, they had found that the treasurer in Patterson had stolen about $1 million, including about $90,000 from the 2% fund there, which they got back through insurance. But he had dipped into that, and so each of the departments has a special account. Either the volunteers or these benevolent associations where the money is segregated, and they have to report it every year to the state comptroller, how much they have. And some of these organizations have stockpiled significant amounts. There are 7 of them in Westchester that have over $1 million in the bank.
Jeez. Now I want to get to Eastchester because it's got, to me, they spoke to you. And there was no contrition about what was going on. In fact, there was defiance, anger at someone even questioning the monies they got, and that they didn't even feel the need that they had to share what they were doing with the money with anyone. But we've learned a few things that they've done in Eastchester, and it certainly raises more than a few eyebrows.
Well, the Benevolent Association in Eastchester has the most money of anybody in the area here, $2.1 million in the bank. The fire district has a sense that they actually have more money, and they actually acknowledge that they do. Exactly how much more they have, we don't know. The fire district went to court with a Freedom of Information request, find out how much they have and what the Benevolent Association says they're unregulated money. And the court ordered them to release the documents. The Benevolent Association didn't, and so that's been appealed. Meanwhile, the fire district has sought a contempt finding against the Benevolent Association for not complying with the court's order.
You know, we should say, in your investigation, a lot of fire companies were actually doing the right thing. They were rebuilding firehouses like they were supposed to. They were helping out with benefits as it relates to some of the members, etc. But when did the disconnect happen, David, where somehow they believed, even though this was taxpayer money that was coming from an outside entity, if you will, that this was money that didn't come with strings attached, and that frankly people shouldn't be asking these questions?
Well, because the state law allows this. What they're doing is not illegal. The law and the interpretation of the law is just wide open. It's not that they weren't supposed to. No, they're allowed to use the money for this.
Given the reporting you've done, given a lot of shock that has come out of it, is this a program, as I said, as you said, with really no strings attached currently, how it's written, it's going to change? It's a matter of when, not if. There's going to be more guidelines and oversight put into this?
I would not.
Really?
I don't think so, Richard, frankly.
Really?
The state comptroller, when he finishes this, he's doing an audit of Yonkers and the other big fire departments about how they use the money. He may come up with recommendations, but to have the state legislature do something to restrict how firefighters use this money, that's not a winning argument in the political arena. And the firefighter lobby is very strong in New York. And it's very strong on the local level as well.
Wow.
They're organized and they have clout.
I would have thought no matter what after this, which has generated more than a little outrage from people to say, wait a minute, my job doesn't do any of that, let alone with tax dollars. I figured we were seeing the beginning of the end of this, but maybe not so much. Anyway, fascinating reporting as always. Thank you so much. I appreciate it for you.
Very good, Richard.
Up next on RFL, a local lawmaker shares her emotional story and tells us how she's taking her personal experience and using it to help thousands of New Yorkers.